Hello, welcome to the AI Buzz with Luca and Josh. I'm Josh Starmer, host of the YouTube channel StatQuest with Josh Starmer, and also a lead AI educator at Lightning AI.
And I'm Luke Antiga, CTO at Lightning AI.
Today we're going to talk about Sarah Gual's advice to AI entrepreneurs, aligning models to customer needs, Luca's predictions about the future of AI, and programming without programming, or automation for everyone. Also, if you want to take this a step further, check out our read log, the source material and tweets, so you can keep exploring. And so, Luca, one of the things we do every week, or in fact, you do, because you are much better about this than I am, is you scour social media and Twitter and things like that to find out what exactly is the buzz. What is buzzing right now? And you pointed out to me a Twitter thread by Sarah Guo, a sort of a thought leader on Twitter, and also a venture capitalist. And it's a fascinating thread about how large language models are going to change everything. And I thought maybe we could just go through this thread and sort of add commentary to it and what do we see is going on. Sarah Gual's tweet was split into 13 parts, which can be found in this week's read log. However, here are the main ideas. Despite the hype, there is real market value for large language models. Don't focus too much on the technical details, and success depends on finding your niche, identifying customers, and creating a user experience that fits.
This in particular was interesting to me because it kind of summarized an angle that we should adopt when we talk about language models in the context of creating new business and creating value in general that I think we need to start thinking about. And it has several points. One of the points is, despite the AI hype that is around today, the first months of these things being out and being available for people to create micro startups or not so micro startups is there's plenty of customer value. So the value is there. These companies are creating recurrent revenue. Maybe they're peaking and then they're like dropping their adoption. For example, I remember seeing the one avatar website that uses stable diffusion that was showing that it peaked to crazy numbers and then something else came up and they couldn't keep up. But the point is that the customer value is there, especially if we think about LLMs as agents capable of doing things for you, not just creating your avatar per se or creating art, but automating something, creating boilerplate for you, or reviewing your code, whatever. And not only for instant value, but also retention and repeat usage. So another point she's making is that scratching your head, trying to understand what will stick and what is transient. I just spoke about this, adoption curve, and because it's probably very, very, it's an exercise of premature optimization somehow, and you probably need to go with something and then be ready to listen to users. And but until you actually start engaging yourself with creating an actual product that solves a problem for a pocket of users out there, and you get the feedback from those based on these interactions, like strategizing of what your stack will be, technological stack will be, and kind of build your own. And it's just to accrue a competitive advantage. It's probably not a good strategy. You should start from the bottom. I always say, if you have to build a product, you should start from the very end, which is the start, which is the interaction with the user, and make everything else as light as possible, which is basically what LLMs offer today. When we talk about just take one, either self-host it, use an API, and start like creating value with that. So the execution and being able to be nimble is going to be the thing that kind of makes a difference, and not that much I'm going to use this model or that model, or I'm going to use a stack on one language or the other, or where I'm hosting my applications. These are problems that will come after. And So AI, up-level AI experimentation, which is what this person we're referring to talks about, um, is is the core, and in the context of a specific uh, application domain. And
Mm-hmm.
and this is also why in our daily life we're kind of interested at Lightning. We're very interested at talking to scientists, talking to people in other domains that it's not AI per se, because this is where the extra context will come in and create something really unique. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and then there was like a piece of the thread that really fascinated me because I think it was spot on.
Okay.
Um, and it's a bit controversial for maybe traditional AI practitioners, but it says verbatim: researchers knocking ChatGPT as a model that had basically already existed publicly for a year in GPT Playground or as an API. And those who are knocking up companies in thin shims on foundation model APIs have fallen prey to technical arrogance. And I really agree with that, right? So it doesn't matter if it's thin. And this is something we were saying in the last episode, right? If it's thin, if it's
Yeah.
just a prompt on top of a language model, yes, it makes you prey of competition because your competitive advantage is really
Yeah.
small. And if you figure out what the prompt that you use is, somebody else can do it. But in the meantime, we will have acquired users. You will have addressed a real problem, and so on. So it doesn't really matter if it's just a standard language model with a small prompt in the front. The point is that you're actually getting to solve a need, and
Yeah.
this is what the value of these models is. You get from that to the potential creation of value really quickly if you're executing correctly.
Yeah. To interrupt a little bit, going back to the very first point that Sarah Guo makes, is that she says founders are going from $0 to $10 million in ARR, annual recurring revenue, in the first 18 months of efficient selling and leveraging of LLMs against niche use cases. So specifically, like, trying to summarize, like you were saying, summarize a telephone call, or like one thing we've done in this or the reading guide is we use some sort of large language model to summarize this Twitter thread. And so we've summarized it, or using a large language model, and it's an amazing summary, and it's a great example of a great use case of how it's not super complicated. And yeah, it's not like blowing our minds in terms of sophistication and complexity, or like, yes, potentially other people could be doing this, but the point is these people are doing it now for us. And so we're on board. We're just right here, right now. And they've got it while it's hot. And I think
Yeah,
that's sort of an important point, that companies are going from zero to a huge amount of money relatively quickly. Um, and the only thing they're doing is really finding their audience for a relatively narrowly focused use of a large language model.
yeah,
Um, which I
yeah,
think is it's very encouraging, and it also, yeah, it points out that it's not just the technology, it's not just all the infrastructure, it's not just making the coolest large language model, it's about learning how to apply it in a very specific way.
yeah. We are so used to for these things to be hard to make that a lot of
Yeah,
companies are focused on, well, it's easy to make, so why should we bother? But that's that's a normal
yeah,
state, right? Easy to make would be great if you then need to think about a product. And sometimes we kind of mix the hard to make with the value you will create. And these tools are like bringing to our attention that this is not necessarily the case, and you can build something very valuable with a relatively small technical complexity. Of course, when you scale up, when you do, then and when you want to reduce costs, you have a ton of users, you call out to an external API, you're spending all your money on that. And I've played with various APIs, and I saw money being like going down like really, really quickly. So these things are not cheap. But
yeah,
for validating a product idea, that's not a problem. That's a problem you will have later on when you have to kind of engineer. For sure, it looks a lot like patchwork today. So you know, calling out to APIs and is what you do usually. But then, how do you patch things together? How do you have a good user flow? How do you don't not confuse the user or manage the unpredictability that language models has? These are real problems. And tools that kind of help solving those problems will be very instrumental in this space. And all the safety stuff is, of course, rocket high. And we've seen it with many LLM products. So it's not that we're in a space where everything has been figured out. Not at all. What we're saying is these objects, these artifacts are things that we didn't have before. And they kind of change all the balance for what the future is looking like. And so we're trying to read what the future could be looking like, even though we know full well that, you can take a model and trick it to say something stupid. Yes, of course, it's not a miracle, but this doesn't change the fundamental fact that a lot of trade-offs that we were kind of used to, and checks and balances that we're used to, and roles and blah, 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 are going to be subverted in a very short time.
Yeah. So I was sort of thinking about, people were potentially belittling ChatGPT because or creating companies based on that, or based on these existing foundation models, as like real thin, not that important. But what you're saying is that the importance isn't necessarily the technological hurdle on its own. It's being able to attract users and customers. And once you have those, sure, you can get some capital, some resources, some money to then invest in your own implementation of that large language model so that you can cut down costs and you can streamline it then. But you don't need to start off with that, right? If you start off with that and you don't have a way of guaranteeing that you're going to draw in people, then you're just wasting a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money. And it's better to stay light and stay quick and stay fast and just try things until you find something that sticks and brings the people in. And then that's the appropriate time to think about what do you need to do to take you to the next level so that you're actually making a profit off of all these user experiences that you're generating.
Yeah, and this doesn't only apply to new companies or micro startups or startups and so on. It actually applies maybe even more to established businesses, right? They want to jump on this. They need, for sure, they need environments in which they can develop these things that are really, really fast and get them to value as soon as possible, as fast as possible, so they can iterate from there. And it has never been more true than right now. So anyway, the great thread. We had a good time talking about it. There are many points, I think, that one of the points was, ChatGPT reached a lot of users, a lot more users that its like API counterpart or other kind of models of that kind, because it has an interface that makes sense to consumers. I think the interface there, yes, it's true. It's one of the statements in the thread. I think it's true if we think about the user interface as two things. One is I just have a chat and I type my thing in there. It's very accessible. That's for sure true. The other thing is the user interface for a model is the way it's been aligned. And we talked about alignment a lot until now. So
Yeah.
if you have a model that you need to prompt in very specific ways, this is the equivalent of a clunky UI where you need to know how
Yeah.
to use it in order to use it. So if you see your friend
Yeah.
clicking here, here, and there, maybe you can kind of understand what to do. But the fact that ChatGPT has been aligned using what we described in the past, our LHF and with ranking and so on, to produce an experience that looked like a question answer and engagement that looks kind of more human like.
Yeah.
And that also kind of is tolerant to the prompt being non very specific, but still can hone in on the thing you meant. That's the UI for models, right?
Yeah.
So I think ChatGPT, yes, it was in a form, the chatbot, but also it has been aligned in a way that turns it into a product. So again,
Yeah.
Alignment itself is a way of productizing something, not just refining on a certain subject, not just injecting new knowledge in that thing, but also making that thing
Yeah.
interact in a way that is what your product needs to be doing, right? So uh, this is a consideration that I think it's important.
I think it's a big deal because in terms of the alignment, because say like a traditional Google, I know I've mentioned this before, a traditional Google search, you have to think in terms of keywords in order to get a useful,
Yep.
search results on the first couple of pages and not have to go through 20 pages before you find the thing you want. So in a way, as a user, I have to think about Google. I have to think about how to use Google, and I have to plan it, and I have to
Be part of the machine somehow.
exactly. I have
Yeah.
to be part of the machine. I have to
Yeah.
understand it. Whereas this is completely opposite. That now the machine understands us, and we don't have to. I don't have to think about what the chat gpt needs to know in order to do a good job at what it does. Instead, I can just be conversational, and it reveals itself to me rather than the other way around. And I think that's groundbreaking. And I think if people apply that in more settings, it's almost going to be like invisible. It'll be there. It'll
Yeah.
be part.
Exactly.
It's almost like right now we've got autocomplete with tweet, with texts and email and things like that. But it's gonna be like that, but a millionfold more and a millionfold better. And every little instances of that use is a potential startup.
Yeah, I agree. So,
Yeah.
and we'll take it to the extreme by the end of the episode, I think. This concept of every little use, right? Because we chatted
Yeah.
half an hour ago, and kind of something
Yeah.
came up that was really interesting, I think. So we'll touch on that in a second. But we're talking a lot about ChatGPT itself, right? And it's not
Yeah.
about, and we said it already, it's not about ChatGPT. It's about this category of models, and ChatGPT is an example of a very capable
Yeah.
model that was aligned to do something. So we're taking it as an example. But what are the predictions, right, for the near future? So will we be stuck with instances of those 2-3 things or 2-3 models? What will happen, right? Where's the end of this? Because right now we're actually the whole thing just started. Yes, they have been out for a while, but these kind of models have been available for a few months, and they're already kind of
Yeah.
impacting a lot. And there are many smaller models, right, that can classify a sentiment of a particular text and so on. So you cannot have a conversation, you cannot ask them to do something complex, but they will do a very specific task very effectively. So what will we be doing in the future, right? So what is the trade-off there? So I think it's also a bit interesting to kind of explore that. Um, Models will get very capable really soon.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have is will they get to a point where the cost benefit will be that the model is capable enough? When I say capable enough, is I think is not really to understand what you're saying, but actually to figure out what to do. If I say,
Yeah.
I need to go on vacation and I need you to book my tickets, and the model will be able to kind of blurt out all the operations and actually have a runtime that collects information for that and figure out what to do, and it's already partially possible, right?
Yeah.
So when is capable enough? This is one question, and my bet is that there will be a category of models that will be capable as the ones today, but then they will get a lot smaller, right? So a smaller model that is capable enough and is small enough to be served by you, either on the cloud or something, right? But with a limited cost. Right now, there's kind of a separation between models small enough to be used directly without actually having be gate kept behind an API, right? And these models are not at the level of GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT today. There are some open source models, but they're not aligned as well. There's a safety question and so on. So the prediction, though, is that we'll get there eventually, quite quickly as well. So at some point, the world will be in a world where you can have your own or ping an API to do it. And there will be a population of models that will be capable enough to be meaningfully impactful for your business or whatever, to create new products. And I think the divide there will be if a model is able to behave in compute, reason and compute in context based on the prompt. So one thing where we see from GPT is you give it the rules of the game, and it will start behaving according to those rules, right? So say, okay, every time you hear this, spit that, and then or take this text, put it into bullet points that are formatted this way. First I want the introduction, then blah blah blah, and it will do it. So that's what I mean when I say capable enough, as opposed to I train a small model to summarize text, and all we will do is take the text and summarize it, but will not follow instructions.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's a big divide, I think, and it's kind of the reasoning part of it.
Yeah.
And so there will be like open models and closed models coexisting, and probably closed models will be higher quality for a while, and then open models will trail. But especially for alignment, it's possible that they will trail for a bit. A bit like open source software there's amazing open source software, but it probably came a bit after. And especially when you talk about UIs, if you ever use open source UI, there's great software out there, but sometimes there's a refinement factor that it's hard to get into from open source software. I'm not probably I'm overgeneralizing, but just to give like a parallel, an idea. It's really hard to find software that was homebrew from the community that has this unifying, like super polished look. And I think similar things will apply to alignment, because I think going back to ChatGPT and the UI of ChatGPT is the way you align. So and I'm not saying that this won't happen. I'm just saying that this will be the tricky part for open model. And this, but the models will be very capable probably, and gives us a lot of opportunities there to create experiences in the end, right? UI is or UX is about creating the experience. Because in the end, what do you use software for? To make the machine do something for you, right? And how do you provide instructions to a machine? Well, either through a UI or through programming. And so
Yeah.
programming is a way to, instruct a machine to do something for you. But for most people, this was too hard. So we have applications that kind of create an experience again around that particular thing I need to do. So I don't have to code it myself, and I can actually, as a human, I can provide my intentions by clicking the buttons that some other human figured out would be the right thing to expose. I
Yeah.
think with LLM is becoming a bit like in the future, it will become a bit more like blurred, because the programming being about creating enabling automation, and LLMs being able to take instructions to perform automations. um, we can easily see that, right? That more people will program, right?
Yeah.
So machines will be capable of executing programs that are expressed by the end user directly. So in a way, we're getting into a situation where personal applications will have a kind of a resurgence. I mean, it's kind
Yeah.
of, maybe it won't be the case, but if you think about it, a lot of applications being about automation, uh,
Yeah.
and those applications being fine tuned by somebody who knows how to program, and then extrapolating an experience that is usable. Now, if I can express the same need to something that can directly interpret that need and make something happen on top of that, then the boundary between what I need to figure out in a UX that is kind of
Yeah.
already like codified by a human, and that boundary is going to be pushed down towards the machine, because right now I have a layer that helps me, express my needs in a certain domain, of course, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a bit like, I don't know. I'm thinking that maybe things like your folder automations on the Mac, or going out to the automator, that it's always like they try to make it simple, but it's never simple, because the moment
Yeah.
you need to do something complicated, then the programming goes in, and so you need to like write for loops, because it fundamentally the operating system is dumb, right? But now we have a
Yeah.
middleman, and
Yeah.
and so you know both of us are not too young, and so we remember. Do you remember HyperCard?
Yeah, that was my first true love. That was the one that brought me to the dance. When I was a kid, I loved HyperCard because it wasn't like programming. It was more like drawing pictures. And I'm a very if you see my YouTube channel, you know that I'm a very visual person.
Yes.
And HyperCard was you start off with a blank canvas, and the first thing you do, you don't write like include standard io.h or import some library, or even type print hello world. That's not what you do. The first thing what you do is you click on the paintbrush tool and you draw hello world. And I'm like, oh, I can do that. And then what you can do is then you could like select the H in hello, and you could, with like a lasso tool or whatever. And when you selected it, a dialogue would open up and it'd say, "What do you want to have happen if someone clicks on the H?" You know, and I would be like, "Well, if they click on the H, I want to make a like a horn sound, like play horn sound." And so, and then that's the way programming was. So then I had this program that shows it says "Hello World," and you click on the H, and you have a little like trumpet sound, and it was all, but it was based on for me it was, I mean, I just loved it because it was based on doing things visually and sort of like pointing at things and selecting them and then assigning some task to whatever it is, like if people click on it or the mouse goes over it. And to me it was like transformative and changed everything. But it seems like maybe, and one thing that was cool is because I could understand it, I could write any program I wanted basically, in a real simple way. And I think what we're saying here is that era of like individuals being able to do the programming is going to come back soon. And like you're saying earlier, you could have a company that books tickets for us, or I could say, whatever language model is running on my desktop, because it's small enough that it can, and the computers, in 2 years are fast enough. This is like a convergence of those two things, computing speeds plus the models themselves shrinking to like an essential size. And I could say, book me tickets to Hawaii for a fantastic vacation. And instead of someone in some headquartered company far away, the computer itself then writes the program to do that.
Or
And it
does
becomes
that
my personal
without writing
vacation
the
program.
program. Yeah. It just does that.
Or it just does it. Yeah.
So
and so there's all this automation that just happens.
Exactly. So I think in terms of personal applications, I had a fascination for HyperCard as well. And, the thing was that when you then want to make it do something complex, that it was not visual.
Yeah.
Then you needed, it had this HyperTalk programming language that looked like natural language. So all the intuitions were there, of course. But then, lacking a real natural language to program kind of, or to actions directly, right? Interpreter. Then as things became more complicated, the complexity of the HyperTalk you had to write, like went on and on to resemble more and more an actual programming language, because you had to loop, you had conditions and so on. Yes, they were expressed simply, and all this card analogy helped mitigating the complexity of things. So that was great. The premise and the purpose of that was, I think, aligned with what will happen right now. So it's not really that we have a system to generate programs. We have a system right now that can interpret intentions and action them. And so this will empower people not really to code or to help them code, but help with automation tasks that may be, simple or not so simple. Like, writing a text is not simple, but like writing some boilerplate at this point is easy, because you just ask it and it's fun because you see people getting absolutely addicted to this, like in real time, like instantly, right? So this is an effect that of something that is sticky. Now, when this thing can actually perform actions, why should I wait for somebody to code something for me that conforms to my needs, right? I could just try to do it myself. And if it's simple enough. And so the level of complexity that these things can, that the bridge between my intention expressed in natural language and what I can achieve is going higher and higher. So I can do complex things. So I think the premise of HyperCard somehow is being brought back in a different form. But I think, this quote, there was a guy, like he was Apple, and not from Apple, but he was following in the 80s. It was following the technology and so on. And there's this quote in Wikipedia on the HyperCard page I see. And I want to read it because, we can make the parallel between this and the kind of applications that we will be able to create. And it says, the beauty of HyperCard is that it lets people program without having to learn how to write code. What I call programming for the rest of us. HyperCard has made it possible for people to do things they wouldn't have had ever thought of doing in the past without a lot of heavy-duty programming. It's led a lot of non-programmers like me into that loop. And I think the promise was not achievable at the time. But I think the goal for it, I think it's becoming achievable. So how does this translate into, what product we'll be building as entrepreneurs, or, we'll be funding as VCs in the future? Not necessarily just personalized applications, but it's interesting to me, the fact that the boundaries are so mobile at this point. So the user is empowered, and the empowerment of the user will bring in new paradigms, and even the UI itself maybe will simplify, because now I don't need to kind of click into things. I have something that I can have a unstructured conversation with. So even that thing will change things dramatically. So universal ways of interacting with complex applications will be a bit more achievable.
Yeah, we're on the front part of, I feel like, a transformative time. Just the way sort of social computing was a big thing 10, 15 years ago, sort of a revolutionary thing where all of a sudden computing and using computers and using digital devices like smartphones made that kind of a transition from something that maybe just nerds did to something that everybody does. And I think the next transformation right now is, used to be just the nerds did all the programming, and that meant they did all the automation. And now now what you're saying, Luca, is that the new transformation now is just like the smartphone meant everyone used computers. Now everyone's going to do automation.
Yeah.